everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Hitchhiker in the Fog. Back in the late fall of 2002, I was driving home from visiting my sister in a small town nestled. The stretch of highway that wound through the region was remote, with no streetlights and almost no passing cars. The two-lane road cut through thick forests and climbed slowly into the hills, always curling around cliffs and ridges that dropped off into shadowy canyons. I had made the trip dozens of times and thought little of the isolation, until one night, something happened on that road that I still cannot explain. I was alone in my car, or at least I thought I was. It was close to midnight when the fog rolled in, not a gradual mist, but a wall of white that seemed to fall from the sky and swallow the road whole. My headlights became useless beams, barely piercing the dense curtain in front of me. I slowed to a crawl, hands tight on the wheel, heart thudding with every blind curve. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rattle of leaves in the wind and the distant cry of some unseen bird. I hadn't seen another car in over 30 minutes. My phone had no signal. The forest around me might as well have been another world. As I came around one particularly sharp bend, I saw a figure on the side of the road, barely illuminated, standing in the edge of my high beams. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing an old brown coat and jeans. He had no backpack, no sign of a vehicle nearby, just standing there in the fog with his thumb extended, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to give him a ride. Against every instinct in my body, I slowed to a stop and rolled down the window. He didn't speak, didn't ask. He just opened the door and slid into the passenger seat as if it were already understood. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere inside the car. The air grew colder. The radio, which had been softly playing static-laced music, went completely silent. I asked where he was headed. He said just up ahead, and smiled faintly. Something about his voice felt off, not menacing, just out of place. Like it was too smooth, too calm for someone walking alone in the wilderness at night. I tried to make conversation, but his answers were always vague. "Where are you from?" I asked. "Nowhere you've heard of," he replied. "What brings you out here?" I asked. "Passing through," he said. Eventually I gave up on talking and focused on the road. We drove like that for nearly 15 minutes. Just me, the fog, and the silent man beside me. Then he asked, "Do you believe in things that walk where they shouldn't?" He was still staring forward, eyes fixed on the road. "Like what?" I said, trying to stay casual. "Like people who are here, but don't belong here. People who missed their exit. People who kept walking after they died." I laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke, but he didn't smile. He turned and looked at me, and in that moment, the air in the car felt like it dropped below freezing. "Some folks don't make it to where they're supposed to go," he said. "They end up stuck right here, between." I tried to lighten the mood by saying something about ghost stories and urban legends, but he just kept watching me. Finally, I told him I needed to stop for gas soon, hoping he'd take the hint and get out at the next pull-off. He didn't say anything else, just nodded once. A few minutes later, I spotted a gas station through the fog, an old one with a single pump and flickering overhead lights. I pulled in, relieved. As I stepped out, I realized I hadn't heard the passenger door open. I looked back inside the car. The seat was empty. No door creak, no sound of footsteps. He was gone. Completely. Not a trace of him remained. Confused and shaken, I circled the car, checked the surrounding area, even walked a few feet down the highway, calling out into the fog. Nothing. Just the gentle hiss of the pump and the hum of insects in the woods. The clerk inside the gas station was an older man, and when I mentioned picking up a hitchhiker who had vanished, he didn't seem surprised. He leaned on the counter and said, "You're not the first to see him. Some say he's been walking that road since the 60s, died in a wreck around that bend you mentioned. Every few years, someone picks him up." I asked how that was possible. He just shrugged. Some folks just don't know how to stop walking. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Had I hallucinated it? Was it stress or fatigue? The more I thought about it, the more real it felt. The weight of him in the passenger seat, the fog clinging to his coat, the sound of his voice. It wasn't just in my head. Something had been there with me, something that didn't belong. I eventually made it home safely, but I never took that highway again. I found a longer, more populated route, and gladly added an extra hour to my trips. It felt like a small price to avoid that foggy stretch of road, and the man who waits there. Now, years later, I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped. Would he have found someone else, or would he have just kept standing in the mist, thumb extended, waiting for another car to slow? Sometimes I think I wasn't the one helping him that night. Maybe he was testing me, seeing if I could see him, if I'd listen, if I'd believe. And sometimes on especially foggy nights, I wake with a sensation that someone is sitting just outside my bedroom door, watching, passing through. Story 2. The Shadow in the Cabin. It was the middle of winter when my friend Corey invited me to spend a weekend with him and a small group at his family's old hunting cabin in the mountains. I had just come off a stressful semester, and the thought of wood-burning stoves, snow-covered trees and quiet nights around a fire sounded like the perfect way to unwind. The cabin sat far from any major roads, accessible only by a dirt trail that wound through thick pines and gradually disappeared into frost. We arrived in 2 cars bringing food, firewood, and just enough cell service to make one call if needed. There were 6 of us in total, and we all shared a quiet thrill at being so far off the grid. The cold air, the crackling fire, the silence, it felt timeless, like we'd stepped into a pocket outside reality. That first night, after dinner and some drinks, we all sat in the main room by the fireplace. The old cabin creaked with each gust of wind, but it was a comforting sound at first. Around midnight we heard a knock. A single, heavy knock on the wooden front door. The laughter in the room died instantly. Corey stood up and opened the door. No one was there. Just falling snow and a blank stretch of woods, lit only by the soft glow of the porch light. We figured it was the wind or maybe a tree branch hitting the wood, so we shrugged it off. Still, the energy in the room shifted. The night felt darker than before. Later, as everyone started drifting to their rooms, I stayed up to stoke the fire a bit longer. The flames were low, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. That's when I saw something move near the window. A shape, not quite human, but roughly the same size. It moved slowly, then disappeared behind the edge of the glass. I froze. The others had already gone to bed. I stood and cautiously approached the window, expecting maybe a deer, maybe some trick of light. But what I saw next chilled me deeper than the snow outside. 2 handprints, pressed against the window from the outside. Large, almost too large. The fingers were long, spread unnaturally wide, and the prints were still fresh, melting frost where warm skin had touched cold glass. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, poker in hand, watching the windows. When the sun finally came up, I told Corey about the handprints. He looked concerned but said maybe someone had come up from another cabin nearby, though we both knew there weren't any others for miles. That day passed uneventfully, though the unease lingered. We stayed together, kept the fire going strong, avoided mentioning the incident around the others, but the silence outside the cabin began to feel wrong, too quiet, as if the woods were listening. That night we locked every door and window, and one of the guys even rigged a bell to the front door, just in case. The second night brought the real horror. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of something scraping against the outer wall of the cabin. Not scratching, scraping, like claws or nails dragging across old wood. I sat up and listened. It moved around the perimeter, slowly circling the structure. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through snow. Something was walking around the cabin, stopping by each window. A faint tapping began on the glass nearest to my room. I held my breath. I didn't want to look. I don't know how long it lasted, but eventually it faded, swallowed by the winter dark. In the morning we found prints, deep impressions in the snow circling the entire building, but they weren't normal tracks. The toes were too long, the stride was wrong, and they just stopped. No trail away, just gone. That morning, 2 of the group wanted to leave early, citing a sudden change in weather as their excuse. They packed up and took one of the cars. The rest of us stayed, unsure if it was wiser to stick together or get out. Corey said the snow would thicken by nightfall, and we could all leave in the morning together. We tried to keep spirits high that day, but it was no use. Something had changed. The forest felt closer, more aware, and as dusk crept over the hills, we knew the night would not pass quietly. We barricaded the doors, piled furniture against the windows, and sat together in the main room, fire roaring, all pretending we weren't afraid. The night dragged. Every sound felt amplified. The wind howled like a voice. Then, just past 2 a.m., the knocking returned. But this time it wasn't just the front door. It was all around, every wall, every window. Knock. 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 As if something or many things were surrounding us. We all followed his gaze. Through the small square window, a face stared back. Tall, pale, featureless except for 2 black hollows where eyes should have been. It didn't move, just watched. Then the power cut out. Darkness swallowed the cabin. The fire sputtered, flickering madly. Someone screamed. We backed into a corner, holding anything that could be used as a weapon. The knocking grew louder, more aggressive. Scratching resumed on the walls. For what felt like hours we sat like that, waiting for something to break in, but nothing ever did. At some point the sound stopped. The face vanished. The fire died down, and then morning came, without explanation or warning. Light poured in through the windows, and the woods looked peaceful again. Too peaceful. We left at dawn, piling into the last car, driving without looking back. When we reached the base of the mountain, one of the tires blew out. As we changed it, Corey noticed something etched into the metal rim. Long scratch marks, as if clawed by something impossibly strong. No one said a word. We got home safe. None of us ever went back to that cabin. Corey's family eventually sold it. He said he never told them what happened. He couldn't find the words, and none of us have spoken about it since. But some nights, when the wind scrapes against my windows just right, I remember those handprints. I remember the shadow watching through the glass. And I wonder if whatever was out there ever left those woods at all. Story 3. The Visitor in the Stairwell. In 2015, I lived in a 5-story apartment complex in a quiet part of the city, where nothing exciting ever happened. It was a modest building, just 20 units total, with a single staircase running up the center and no elevator. I lived on the 4th floor, and every morning I'd walk down those same creaky stairs, and every evening I'd trudge back up, usually around dusk, tired from work and ready to disappear into my little sanctuary. The neighbors kept to themselves, which I liked. Everyone was polite, quiet, predictable. That is, until a new tenant moved into apartment 503. No one ever saw them come or go. No packages, no mail, no lights from under the door. And yet, strange things started happening the day they arrived. It began with the lights in the stairwell. They were motion activated, triggered by someone passing by. Normally they'd flick on for a few minutes and fade. But I started noticing that they would stay on late at night, usually between 2 and 3 in the morning. I'd wake up for water and glance down the hallway through my peephole, only to see the stairwell light glowing like someone was standing there, unmoving. I assumed it was a wiring issue, until one night I stepped out quietly to check. I peeked down the staircase, and I swear I saw someone standing still on the landing below, facing the wall. No motion, no reaction, just a pale figure standing utterly still. I backed into my apartment and locked the door. The next morning, I asked my neighbor across the hall if she'd seen anything strange. She nodded hesitantly and told me she had heard slow footsteps pacing outside her door late at night, always followed by a soft tapping, like fingers brushing the metal doorknob. She'd been too scared to open the door. She also mentioned a new tenant in 503, who she claimed hadn't made a sound since moving in. That night we both decided to stay alert. I left my phone recording audio by the door and went to bed, unsure of what we'd find. When I played back the recording the next morning, there was a strange moment around 2:17 a.m. A soft thump, followed by what sounded like slow, deliberate breathing right next to the mic. Then nothing. Just silence. It sent chills down my spine. A few days later, I bumped into the landlord and asked casually about the resident in 503. He looked confused and told me that apartment had been empty for nearly 6 months. No lease, no key issued. According to his records, no one should be living there. When I asked him to check, he pulled out his master key and we went up together. The hallway was silent as we approached the door. He knocked. No answer. He unlocked it and pushed it open slowly. The room was completely empty. No furniture, no carpet, just bare wood floors and a cold draft drifting from the window. But something was wrong. The walls were covered in faint marks, as if dozens of fingertips had been dragged down them in long, deliberate motions, and in the center of the floor sat a single chair, facing the wall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to convince myself it was an abandoned unit and nothing more. But at 2:33 a.m., I heard it again, soft footsteps on the stairs, slow and uneven. I looked through the peephole and saw the same figure, tall, still, pale, standing at the top of the stairs, just beyond my door. It wasn't facing me but the wall, like it was listening, or waiting. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After a few minutes, it simply turned and walked up toward the 5th floor. I never heard the door open. I never heard it close, just footsteps fading upward into silence. The next morning, I found scratches on my door. Not deep gouges, but more like smears, long fingerprints trailing down from the peephole to the handle. I called the landlord again, but he was out of town for the week. I showed the marks to my neighbor, and she paled instantly. She had the same on her door. That night, we both agreed to leave a voice recorder in the hallway between our doors. What we captured the next morning didn't sound human. It was a slow, rhythmic whispering, like dozens of voices layered together, all breathing the same word over and over alive. Not shouted, not angry, just final. We reported it to the landlord when he returned, and he finally agreed to seal off apartment 503. He said he would board up the door, change the locks, and even install a new motion sensor system in the stairwell. For a few weeks, things quieted down. The lights stayed off at night. The footsteps stopped. My neighbor and I started to relax, thinking maybe it had just been someone squatting, someone disturbed. But then one evening, I returned from work to find a small folded note slipped under my door. It was a torn piece of paper, yellowed with age. On it was a single sentence in block letters: "He watches from inside the wall." I left that building a week later, broke my lease and moved in with a friend across town until I could find something permanent. My neighbor followed not long after. I still drive past the building sometimes. It looks the same. Quiet. Normal. I've checked online and apartment 503 is still listed as vacant. But a few months ago, someone posted a photo to a local forum, an image taken from the stairwell window at night. In the picture, you can just make out a pale face peeking through the crack of 503's door. It's not clear. Could be a trick of the light. Could be something else. But I know what I saw. And I know that some spaces don't stay empty. Sometimes they're just waiting. Story 4. The Man at the Crossing. It was the middle of October when I took a short solo road trip through the rural Midwest. A journey I had planned as a way to clear my head. The route I mapped out passed through forgotten towns and long stretches of farmland, with miles of open road between gas stations and few signs of modern life. On the second night, I checked into a quiet roadside motel that sat just off an old highway that barely showed up on Google Maps. The woman at the front desk was polite but distant. She handed me a room key, mentioned to lock the door tightly, and offered a parting warning not to walk around after midnight, especially near the old railroad crossing just down the hill. The warning stuck with me more than it should have. Something about the way she said it, calm but hollow, left me uneasy. After settling into the room, I sat by the window, watching dusk stretch over the horizon like a slow-moving curtain. The motel was nearly empty. Just 2 other cars in the lot, and in the distance, I could see the silhouette of the railroad crossing, a broken old gate and a pair of tracks that hadn't been used in years. The rails were rusted and crooked. I told myself it was nothing, probably just a small town superstition, but the more I stared at those tracks, the heavier the air began to feel. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The mattress was firm, the silence too thick. Around midnight, I got up and made some tea using the little motel room kettle. I stepped outside onto the small balcony, sipping from a foam cup as a breeze cut through the trees. That's when I saw him. A figure standing near the railroad crossing, barely lit by the flickering street lamp. He wasn't moving, just standing with perfect stillness in the middle of the tracks, facing away from the motel. At first I assumed it was a local out for a walk, maybe someone lost in thought, but he didn't shift, didn't sway with the wind. He was frozen in place like a shadow carved from night. I watched him for several minutes, waiting for him to turn or step away, but nothing changed. Finally, I went back inside, shut the curtain, and locked the door. I tried not to think about it, told myself it was none of my business. But sometime around 3 a.m., I heard the sound of faint tapping on my window, slow, deliberate taps spaced evenly apart. I froze, heart pounding. My room was on the 2nd floor. No balcony outside the window, no ledge to stand on. The tapping stopped. I didn't look. I stayed in bed until morning light crept through the curtain, and only then did I dare glance outside. There were 3 fingerprints smeared across the glass, long, dusty prints that trailed downward. The next morning I went down to the front desk and asked the woman about the crossing again. She hesitated, then said locals call it the Watchman's Bend. According to her, decades ago a railroad worker was killed there, hit by a train he didn't hear coming during a foggy night. Since then, people had seen him appear on the tracks, always standing still, always looking away. He's not dangerous, she said softly, but he remembers. And if you see him, you should never approach, never speak. Just go inside and lock your doors. I thanked her, not sure what to believe, and decided to leave town a day early. As I checked out, she handed me a folded note. For the road, she said. The note was short. Just a single line. He appears to those who listen too closely. I didn't fully understand it, but it unsettled me. As I drove away from the motel, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The crossing was still visible through the trees, and there he was, the same figure, standing between the rails. Only this time he was facing the motel, and I swear I saw his head tilt slightly, as if he were watching me leave. I didn't stop. I didn't look back again. The rest of the drive home was uneventful, but the experience stayed with me. I told a few friends, half expecting them to laugh it off, but one of them, the quiet type, into local legends and forgotten roads, told me there were stories like this scattered all over the country, places where time frays and people become echoes, ghosts of routine, stuck in moments that never finished. He said the worst thing you can do is acknowledge them too fully. Once you see them clearly, he said, they might start seeing you too. Weeks passed, and I moved on. But one night, parked at a red light in my hometown, I saw something in the rearview mirror. A man standing beside the tracks just a block away, motionless under the crossing lights. There was no train, no cars, no movement. I blinked, and he was gone. Or maybe he never moved at all. I drove home in silence, and that night, I locked every window and turned on every light, just in case. I don't know what that figure is, ghost memory, or something else entirely, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see him, waiting on the tracks for someone else to notice. Story 5. The Whispering Woods. Back when I was in college, I spent a summer working as a trail guide for a nature camp nestled deep in the Appalachian woods. It was a beautiful stretch of untouched forest, quiet and thick with pine, stretching for miles beyond the last paved road. The camp was small, just a few cabins, a main lodge, and a series of trails that looped through the hills. I lived there for 8 weeks with a handful of staff and rotating groups of teenagers. My job was to lead them on hikes, teach basic survival skills, and make sure no one wandered off the path. Most days were peaceful, filled with the smell of damp moss, and the soft crunch of boots on pine needles, but something happened in those woods that I've never been able to forget. It started in week 3. We had a particularly restless group, boys who liked to push boundaries, sneak out at night, and dare each other to explore off-limits areas. One of them, a quiet kid named Julian, kept asking about a second trail near the South Ridge. He claimed he saw a narrow path veering off the main loop, marked by 3 stones stacked like a cairn. None of the official maps showed anything like that. I assumed he was just imagining it, or trying to impress his cabinmates. But then one afternoon, I took a solo hike to check the southern ridge myself, and I saw it, a barely there path, winding between dense trees, marked by a pile of 3 smooth stones. I stared at it for a long time. The path looked old, like no one had walked it in years. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped off the main trail to follow it. It twisted tightly through the trees, growing narrower with every step. I walked for maybe 10 minutes before the woods began to feel wrong. Too still, too quiet. No birds, no wind. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft and distant but unmistakable. A voice, or maybe several, whispering my name from deep within the trees. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from behind me. It was ahead, somewhere down the path. I turned around and walked quickly back to camp, never looking over my shoulder. That night, I didn't sleep well. My dreams were full of branches and the feeling of being watched. I told one of the other counselors, but she just shrugged and said weird things happen in old woods. The next day, Julian went missing. He was last seen near the edge of the main trail, not far from where I'd seen that strange path. We searched for hours. The local rangers were called in. Dogs, drones, the whole protocol. But he was gone. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Nothing. Just vanished into the trees like he was never there. After Julian disappeared, the camp shut down temporarily. The kids were sent home and staff were asked to stay and assist with the search. I returned to the southern ridge once, against instructions. The path was still there, the stones still stacked, but something had changed. The air was colder, the trees bent inward as if leaning to listen. I stood at the edge and whispered Julian's name. There was no response, but when I turned to leave, I heard that whisper again, clearer this time and closer. My name, spoken slowly, like the wind learning how to talk. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back at the cabin, door locked, lights on. A week later, the search was called off. Julian was declared a missing person. His parents were devastated. The staff tried to move on, but something hung over the camp like a fog. I left before the summer ended, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed me back from that path. In the months that followed, strange things kept happening. I'd hear whispering outside my apartment window at night. Trees outside my bedroom would tap gently against the glass, even when there was no wind. And sometimes, just before sleep, I'd see shadows moving in the corners of my room, shadows shaped like branches. Years passed. I moved to a new city, got a different job, tried to forget. But then I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photo, blurry, grainy, clearly taken in the woods. It showed a figure standing at the edge of a trail, back turned, arms by his side. The figure looked like Julian. On the back of the photo were 3 words he never left. I don't know who sent it. I don't know how they found me. But I knew what it meant. The woods remembered. They kept what they took. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of that path. I see the trees arching overhead, the stone cairn, the whispering voices. They call me by name. They say they've been waiting. I haven't gone back. I never will. But deep down, I know the path is still there, winding somewhere in the hills, waiting for the next person to listen to closely, waiting for the next name to whisper. And if you ever find yourself in unfamiliar woods, and you see a trail that isn't on the map, marked by 3 stones, don't follow it, not even for a moment, because the forest doesn't give back what it takes, it only waits. Story 6. The locked room in apartment 9C. When I first moved into the city, I was just grateful to find a place that was quiet, affordable, and close to work. The building was old but well kept, with creaky staircases and heavy wooden doors that gave it a charming, vintage atmosphere. I lived on the 9th floor, in Unit 9 billion, right next to a room that no one seemed to know much about. It was labelled 9C, but the door was always locked, the lights never turned on, and no one ever came in or out. At first I thought it was a utility closet, or maybe a storage space, but even the maintenance guy avoided it when I asked. He just shrugged and said, "That room's been locked longer than I've been here." Then he changed the subject. My curiosity didn't go away though. I'd pass by that door every morning and every night, and each time I got a little more obsessed. I started noticing small things, like the way dust never gathered on the doorknob, or how the faintest sound of movement came from behind the wall sometimes, always late at night. It was never loud, just a soft shifting, as if furniture were being dragged, or someone was pacing slowly. I told myself it was just the building settling or maybe pipes knocking, but deep down I knew better. Something was inside that room, something that didn't want to be seen. One night I couldn't sleep. The city was too quiet. I got up for a glass of water and paused near the hallway wall shared with 9C. There it was again, the sound of movement, slow and steady. But this time it stopped the moment I stepped closer. Then I heard a whisper, soft, unintelligible, right against the wall. I pressed my ear to the surface and froze. The voice wasn't mumbling. It was repeating something, over and over. "Don't open it. Don't open it." I backed away, heart pounding, unsure if I was dreaming, or if something in that room knew I was listening. The next day I told the building manager what I'd heard. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You're not the first tenant from 9 billion to say that." I asked him what was in 9C, and after a long pause he finally answered, "No one really knows anymore. There were tenants, a long time ago, but things happened. After a while no one wanted to stay there. Eventually it was just easier to lock it up and leave it alone." I pressed for more, but he just shook his head and walked away, muttering something about not waking it up. That night I dreamed of the room. In the dream, I stood in front of 9C, the door wide open, and inside was nothing but darkness. Not an empty room, just pure blackness stretching endlessly in all directions, and something was in there with me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it watching, breathing, waiting. When I woke, I found 3 long scratches on my front door, just above the handle. No one else on the floor had marks like that. I checked the hallway camera feed through the front office, but that section of the hallway had inexplicably gone black for 3 hours during the night. Still, I couldn't stop myself. I began spending more time listening at the wall, tracking the whispers, the movements. I tried to record the sounds, but every time I played the file back, all I heard was static, or once a long, low sigh that seemed to go on forever. I knew I should move. I knew I should pack up and find somewhere else, but something about that room had gotten into my mind. I started having waking dreams, moments where I'd be standing in my kitchen and suddenly realize I'd been staring at the wall for minutes, whispering things I didn't remember learning. Then one night, the door to 9C was open, just slightly, a crack wide enough to see into pitch black. I don't know why, but I reached for the knob. Before I could touch it, I heard a sound from inside, like a single deep inhale, as though the room itself had lungs and had noticed me. I slammed my own door and locked it, heart hammering, sweat beading down my back. That night I pushed a chair against my door and left all the lights on. In the morning the door to 9C was shut again, but this time a note was wedged underneath mine. It was written in shaky letters. "You almost let it out." I moved out that week. I didn't bother breaking the lease. I left furniture behind. I just packed what I could fit into my car and drove until the city was far in my rearview mirror. I never looked back, never asked what happened to the next tenant in 9 billion. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up from a dream where I'm standing in the hallway again, staring at a door that shouldn't be open, with something on the other side breathing slowly in the dark, and I wonder, was it ever a room at all? Or was it something pretending to be one, waiting for someone like me to finally let it out? Story 7. The signal beneath the lake. A few summers ago, I took a temporary job with the Forest Service, helping maintain remote cabins scattered along a chain of quiet lakes deep in the North Woods. Most of the work was routine, checking generators, repairing docks, restocking supplies. But once in a while, we were sent to investigate unusual reports from rangers or campers. It was during one of these calls that I was dispatched to Lake Marrow, a glacial basin so isolated it wasn't even marked on most state-issued maps. It was a place surrounded by steep forested hills and forgotten trails. The only structure nearby was an old cabin that hadn't been used officially in over a decade, but locals still talked about it like it was alive. The report had been vague, something about strange lights and distorted radio signals, but enough to warrant a welfare check. I was flown in by seaplane with another ranger named Ellis. We planned to stay the night and monitor the area. When we landed, everything looked normal, peaceful, even. The water was glassy, the air still, and the trees surrounding the lake swayed gently. The cabin was run down but intact, its windows intact, and its door bolted from the outside. No signs of recent human activity, but the moment we stepped inside, we noticed something odd. The radio on the cabin's emergency desk, disconnected from power and battery, was quietly humming. We checked the wiring. Nothing was hooked up. The radio's internals had been corroded by years of moisture, yet the speaker emitted a low, warbling static. Occasionally, a high-pitched tone would break through, steady and deliberate, almost like a coded pulse. Ellis, more curious than cautious, adjusted the frequency dial. The signal changed instantly. Out came a sequence of beeps and something that sounded like breathing, not mechanical, but slow and human-like. The tone of the static shifted whenever we spoke near it, as if responding to our voices. Ellis wrote it off as some kind of feedback loop, but I wasn't so sure. That night, we built a fire outside and set up our gear. The stars were unusually bright, and everything was unnaturally silent. No insects, no frogs, just the occasional rustling of trees and the lap of water on the shore. Around midnight, the cabin radio came back to life, even though we hadn't touched it. This time there were words faint, fragmented, and spoken in a voice that didn't match any known language. It sounded garbled, like someone trying to speak through water. I stepped closer and felt the air around the cabin grow heavier, colder, and thick with the scent of wet metal. Ellis and I decided to check the lake itself. We took the small canoe tied to the dock and paddled toward the center. The water beneath us was impossibly black, reflecting only a sliver of the moon. About halfway out, the canoe's depth sounder, a sonar device used for mapping lake beds, lit up. Even though it hadn't worked in years, a deep signal bounced back from below, something massive, unmoving, resting at the bottom. But what unsettled us most wasn't the size. It was the shape. The sonar displayed a perfectly symmetrical circle, like a satellite dish buried beneath the lake bed. Ellis said it had to be a glitch. I didn't answer. We turned back, but the water had gone eerily still. Our paddles barely made a ripple, and then we heard it, coming from below the canoe, like a voice rising through a tunnel of pressure, the same garbled message we'd heard on the radio. Only this time it was louder, clearer, and layered with other voices. We couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was calling to us, pleading, begging. We paddled faster, and just as we reached the dock, something thumped the underside of the boat, once, then twice. Not a rock, something soft, something that moved. Back inside the cabin, the radio had gone silent again. Ellis and I didn't speak for hours. We stayed up with flashlights on, watching the water through the window. Around 3 a.m., the lake lit up for a moment, not from the sky, but from beneath. A dull, greenish glow spread outward like something vast had opened its eye. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The next morning we left without speaking. On the return flight, Ellis stared out the window the entire time. Before we parted ways, he finally said, it wasn't just a signal, it was waiting. It waiting. I submitted a full report, but it never made it into the official log. A week later, I checked the cabin's coordinates on the agency map, and Lake Marrow was gone. replaced with an empty grid reference. I asked a supervisor, who told me no such lake had ever been documented. Even the flight records from our trip were missing. Ellis quit the service not long after. Last I heard, he'd moved off the grid entirely. As for me, I still hear the beeping sometimes when I turn on the static of an old radio, and every so often, in the stillness before sleep, I dream of deep water and something pulsing at the bottom, listening, learning, waiting to speak again. Story 8. The Attic Light. When I was a child, we lived in a tall, narrow house at the edge of a small Midwestern town. It had chipped white paint, creaky floorboards, and a crooked chimney that leaned just enough to make the house look as if it were listening to something no one else could hear. At the very top was a small attic room with a gabled window that faced the woods. My parents always kept it locked, saying it was just for storage, filled with old boxes and forgotten furniture. I never questioned it, at least not until the light started appearing. It was always the same. Just past midnight, a faint yellow glow would flicker behind the attic window, like someone had lit a candle and placed it carefully at the center of the room. It would burn low for about 10 minutes, flicker once or twice, and vanish as suddenly as it came. At first I thought it was the moon reflecting oddly through the glass, but the more I watched, the more I realized it was something deliberate. No one ever went up there. The door to the attic was locked tight, and my father kept the key on his belt, worn like a badge. One night I finally asked him about it. He paused for a long moment and said it was just an old wiring issue, nothing to worry about, but I could tell he was lying. His eyes didn't meet mine, and the next day, I found new locks added to the attic door. From that point on, the light started appearing more often. Some nights it stayed for hours, and with it came a strange humming noise that traveled down through the walls, a low, steady thrum that vibrated softly in my bones. My mother acted as if nothing was wrong, but she stopped going upstairs at night and began leaving extra nightlights plugged in around the house. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps above my room. Slow, steady steps pacing directly above my bed. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, afraid to breathe. The attic was supposed to be empty. I listened as the steps moved back and forth, stopping every so often, as if whoever, or whatever, was up there was listening for me, too. After what felt like hours, the steps stopped. I crept to the window and looked up. The light was burning in the attic again. Only this time it was red. A soft, pulsing red like the glow of embers waiting for wind. The next morning I tried to bring it up again. My father snapped at me, something he never did. "Don't ask about the attic again," he said. "That room is not for us." The phrase chilled me. Not for us? Who was it for? That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard the humming return, louder than before. I crept out of bed and walked to the hallway. The attic door was ajar. The lock, usually gleaming and firm, hung loose from its bolt, broken in two. From within the attic, the light flickered again, this time a soft white, like moonlight filtered through smoke. I stepped closer. The air was colder near the attic, thick with the scent of old wood, and something else, something damp and metallic. I placed a hand on the door frame and whispered, "Hello." For a moment the light dimmed, then brightened again, as though reacting to my voice. Then the humming stopped. A silence fell over the entire house. I turned and ran back to my room, locking the door and hiding under the blankets like a child lost in a dream. That was the last night I lived in that house. The next morning we moved out without warning. My father packed the car while my mother said nothing. They never explained why. I never asked again. Years later, after my parents had both passed, I returned to the house on a whim. It was abandoned now, windows boarded, paint peeling worse than ever, but the attic window was untouched, the glass unbroken. I stood at the edge of the overgrown yard and watched as dusk settled across the sky. Then, just as the sun disappeared, the attic light flickered on, bright, deliberate, and unwavering. It stayed there for a long time, watching me, inviting me. I turned and left without going inside. I've tried to convince myself it was all in my imagination. Childhood memories are soft things, pliable, prone to exaggeration. But then, 2 weeks ago, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. My old house at night, attic window glowing red. Scrawled across the back in a shaky hand were the words, "Still not for us." I burned the photo that night, but in the silence that followed, I could hear the faintest hum return. Now every time I look out my own window at night, I expect to see that distant flicker in someone else's attic, spreading from house to house, memory to memory. Some doors are locked for a reason. Some rooms are sealed not to trap things in, but to keep the world outside safe. And when the light appears, soft and waiting, all you can do is turn away. Because once you look too long, it never truly leaves you. Story 9. The room below the floor. It was the kind of house you pass by without a second glance. Old but not abandoned, standing quietly at the edge of a forgotten road in a small town where most people knew each other by name. I inherited it from an uncle I barely remembered, a man my family spoke about only in cautious tones. When the letter arrived, thin, yellowed, sealed in wax, it simply said, "The house is yours now. Take care never to open the floor." I thought it was a joke or some kind of eccentricity, but when I arrived, there it was. A trapdoor in the middle of the hallway floor, sealed with 3 thick metal latches. The house smelled like time had grown bored inside it. Dust coated every surface, and the air felt dense, like it had forgotten how to move. The trapdoor was different. It was smooth, unworn, like it had been installed yesterday. I tried the latches, but they wouldn't budge. They weren't locked with keys, just fused shut, as though the metal had melted into itself. That night, I dreamed of footsteps echoing beneath me. Not above, not outside, beneath the floorboards. A slow, dragging rhythm like someone walking in circles under the house. I spent the next day cleaning, trying to ignore the unease that settled in my chest like dust in my lungs, but the trapdoor pulled at my attention. Every time I passed it, I felt something, a quiet pressure, a sensation like standing beside a deep well. That evening I found a set of journals in the attic, wrapped in old cloth. They belonged to my uncle. Most were filled with mundane entries, weather repairs, notes on the creaking pipes, but the last few pages were different. They were written in uneven handwriting, frantic and jagged. "It's not a basement. It's older than the house. It waits when it's quiet. It whispers when you sleep." That night, I heard it again, the footsteps. Only this time they didn't stay beneath the floor. They moved up the hallway, slowly, one heavy step at a time. I held my breath under the covers, heart hammering. The sound stopped just beneath my bedroom. Then came a voice, so soft it felt like it was inside my head. "You've heard me now. You cannot unhear." I waited until morning before leaving the room. The trapdoor looked the same, but the floor around it was warm to the touch, like something had pressed its hand upward during the night. I should have left. I knew that, but something had started to change in me. The voice, the steps, they were no longer frightening. They were familiar, comforting in a way I didn't understand. I began sitting near the trapdoor, listening. Sometimes I heard breathing, sometimes the faint sound of humming, like a lullaby sung through soil and stone. I started to believe that whatever was down there wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to be known, to be remembered. And one evening, without thinking, I pried at the latches again. This time they moved. The metal gave way like clay under my hands. The door didn't creak. It simply opened. Below was a staircase, impossibly narrow, carved into the earth. The air that rose from it was cool and sweet, like rain on old stone. I lit a candle and descended, each step feeling longer than the last. The walls were smooth and damp. At the bottom I found a room, not a basement, not a cellar. It was perfectly round with no seams, no corners. In the center stood a stone pedestal, and on it, a single mirror facing upward. I stared into it and saw nothing at first. Then, slowly I saw myself, but not as I was. The reflection smiled when I didn't. It blinked when I stared. It moved toward the surface of the mirror until its face was all I could see. Then it whispered my name. My real name, the one I'd never told anyone, the one from before I was born. I dropped the candle and ran, slamming the trapdoor behind me, latching it tight. I sealed it with chains, with salt, with words I didn't know I knew. For weeks I didn't sleep. When I closed my eyes, I saw the mirror, the smile, the whisper. It waited. It always waited. Eventually I moved out. I left the house to rot, boards nailed across the windows, the floor weighted down with concrete. But even now I hear it. Not beneath me anymore, but in the quiet places, inside stairwells, under beds, behind closet doors. The reflection still calls to me in dreams. And sometimes, when the world is still, I catch myself standing at the center of my hallway, staring at the floor, listening for footsteps that never really went away. If you ever find a room you weren't meant to find, a door that no one opens, leave it be, because once it sees you, it never stops watching. Story 10. The road that wasn't there yesterday. A few years ago, I took a seasonal job delivering parcels through a network of rural towns and back roads in a quiet part of the country. Most days were peaceful, even beautiful, winding hills, old barns with ivy, slow rivers reflecting the sky. But one day, while following a route I'd taken dozens of times, I noticed something different. Where there should have been a dead end near a grove of pines, there was now a narrow road I didn't recognize. The pavement looked freshly laid, the lines crisp. Still, I was curious, and deliveries weren't due for another hour, so I turned down it. The moment my tires touched the new asphalt, the air changed. Everything became quieter, as if the world had turned down its own volume. Even the birdsong vanished, replaced by a soft static that buzzed at the edge of my hearing. The trees lining the road leaned inward slightly, and the sunlight took on a strange tint, grey, like dusk caught too early. I drove slowly, thinking maybe it was a service road or a shortcut I had somehow overlooked, but nothing about it felt familiar. The road stretched perfectly straight, no signs, no mailboxes, no intersecting drives, just mile after mile of strange silence. After what felt like half an hour, I realized I hadn't seen any other cars. I stopped and checked my watch. The hands were frozen, unmoving. I checked my phone, no signal, no time, no date. It was as if I had slipped into a pause between seconds. I should have turned back, but something ahead kept pulling at me. A quiet pressure behind the eyes, urging me forward. Then I saw it, a small wooden sign by the side of the road that read, "Welcome back." The words were carved into the wood, worn and old, even though everything else looked new. I pulled over and stepped out. The air smelled like rain, though the sky was dry. Off to the side of the road, just behind the trees, I saw an old gas station, abandoned, paint peeling, with a flickering neon sign that read "Open." It shouldn't have been there. I would have remembered something like that. The pumps were rusted shut, and the glass windows were covered in a thick film of dust, but I swore I saw someone standing inside, a shadow, unmoving, right by the counter. I took a step closer, and the neon sign cut out. Silence rushed in again, heavier now. I ran back to my truck and slammed the door. The engine wouldn't start. The key turned, the lights blinked, but the motor gave nothing but a soft, mechanical sigh. Then, from the rearview mirror, I saw something walking slowly out of the trees. Not a person, not an animal. It had the shape of a man, but its arms were too long, and its face was just a smooth oval with no features, like a blank canvas of skin. It stopped in the middle of the road, tilted its head, and then raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but at the sky. I looked up. The clouds were gone. The stars were out, but they weren't in any pattern I recognized. The sky seemed too close, like a painted dome overhead. The thing on the road turned and began walking away, deeper into the trees, vanishing into the grey-tinted dusk. Then the truck engine roared to life on its own. The headlights came on. My radio blared static. The GPS lit up, but the screen showed only one phrase: "Follow the road." I didn't. I spun the wheel and drove the other way, tires skidding on the perfect asphalt. As I sped back the way I came, the road behind me began to vanish. Not crumble, just fade into mist, like it had never been paved at all. The trees straightened. The sunlight returned to its normal hue. And just before I hit the original highway, I looked in the mirror. For a second I wasn't there. The seat was empty. the truck still moving. But I was gone. Then I blinked, and I was back. Shaking, sweating, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. When I returned to the depot, no time had passed. Not a second. My delivery logs were blank. The dashcam footage was corrupted. Just a loop of the same 30 seconds. I tried to find that road again. I drove the same route. Checked the same grove of pines. But it was gone. Like it had never existed. No fresh pavement, no gas station. No figure in the road. Just trees, still and silent, waiting. Say. Sometimes on long drives I still check for it. That impossible road that wasn't there yesterday. Because part of me thinks it wasn't a place I found by mistake. I think it was looking for me, and one day I might not be able to turn back. One day the sign might say welcome home,